I'm going to start where I started before. Bill King, a perfect example of incredible talent, lots of smarts, and his own time to spend still delivering back to the public. He's done some great research on what's going on with all of our water bills and the hike that every Houstonian, every household is dealing with.
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on here. There was a rate increase that was put in place back in 2010 when Anise Parker was still mayor, and it was basically the water rate would go up by the population and inflation every year without council having to vote on it. And so that has produced some fairly modest rate increases over the last decade because inflation has been so low and the city hadn't really been growing. But in addition to that, in 2017, council voted for a 5-year stepped increase that would basically increase water rates by about 70% over 5 years. That came on top of the inflation and population increases on an annual basis. So this year there was sort of the perfect storm because you had one of the big step increases kick in, which was about 6 to 8%, depending on how much water you used. Plus, they claim inflation was 8.2%, which, by the way, it wasn't. They also claim the city grew by 1%, which, by the way, it didn't. And so when you add all that together, you're getting a rate increase this year of about 16 or 18%. It's really a sort of a jaw-dropping number. But there is no question that for decades, the city undercharged for its water and sewer services. It underinvested. It needed to increase the water rates. But the water revenues have gone up by 50% in the last 3 years. And the city's water and sewer system, which is a separate fund, it's not included in the general fund, went from operating at a basically break even for many years to running up enormous surpluses the last 2 years. In the fiscal year 22, it had almost $1 billion operating surplus. And now we're adding another $200 million of revenue on top of a system that just had $1 billion operating surplus. So it's really quite remarkable the amount of money that's being stacked up over there right now. And, we need it, the system's a mess and all that. But this is also incredibly burdensome. And by the way, incredibly regressive. This hits poor people much harder than it hits anybody else. And so, it's an abdication of council. They didn't want to go in and vote on, water rate increases every year. So they did all these automatic stuff. So they don't have to go in and take a vote every year and vote on water rate increases. I'm sorry, that's your job. Grow up and do your job and tell us what we need to pay for water rates as opposed to just putting in these automatic increases that have just taken off and appear to me to be way, way out of line at this point.
Charles Bland, you watch council very closely. What's your reaction to what Bill just told you?
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's dishonest. I mean, for them, and even I think it was last week. Was it last week or the week before? The finance director and I guess it was the week before because it was at the start of the month. The finance director and the controller presented their numbers, their monthly numbers, and they got asked. I think it was Kubash and then Amy Peck asked how this happened, given there was not really a population increase. And then they kind of went through all these different things and claiming that they're using the general population of the metro area from the census and didn't go into what Bill was saying about inflation, probably because they didn't want people to know. And so it's dishonest for them to do it. It's also, it's for council and dishonest for council members who knew, which I don't know that they all did, but for council members who knew to vote on this and then not kind of draw attention to the fact that that inflation numbers aren't accurate and population is not accurate, and then to not vote on it themselves every single time. I mean, I understand that it's easier to take one hard vote than it is to take 5 consecutive hard votes, but if you're going to increase taxes on people, then you should just man up and essentially have that conversation every single time. It's almost a cop out to take one vote that's going to happen every every year for until what, 2026 or something like that. And then just never have to revisit it. You just kind of let it go and you blame it on the past council or blame it on years before. And it's another way that the city's being dishonest to get more money. I mean, they just continue to do it, and they use different arguments from the tax cap to this, to that, the other, to why they need it. And understandably, they do need money because the whole water system's a mess, but they should have to take tough votes and explain those votes to people when they do it, instead of just trying to kind of blame it on different things. But I do put a lot of this on the finance department because they are the ones kind of finagling the numbers with inflation and with the population.
Stadio Lida, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of working class Latino families in this town. Bill alluded to it. This is costing them, a tank of gas a month. And it's not only going to get more and more and more. This is from an administration that's asking to lift the revenue cap as well. It's just their hands into pockets all the time.
Well, it just seems like every institution is always asking for more and more and more, and not cutting the pork barrel of wasteful spending that they have in each of these institutions or city government. Yes, it impacts the poor people the most always. I felt the pinch in my water bill this month. I said, oh my God, it just keeps going up and up and up. But it's an issue. And I agree with Charles, the comptroller and the financial folks, they miscalculate all this information and they play games and they skew numbers. Everything sounds favorable. City council folks need to work and vote. They don't always have to vote and be afraid of the mayor. They're not worried about their next election. They just need to have courage and say, hey, this is what we need to do. And that's why I'm elected. And, give some pushback, put this out there in the open and not wait until it passes. And now we all have to suffer. And, that's just been typical. And, quite frankly, we're pretty tired of it.
Bob Price, I'm guessing you didn't have a major water rate hike in your new home.
If I mentioned how nice it is to live in East Texas and out in the country, I can walk down the street and walk into the mayor's office. Where I work, I can walk into that city mayor's office and talk with her. I can walk in and talk to the county judge, and it's really nice. And by the way, we are sending tons of water down to you guys. So what are you doing with it?
Chow, what do you make of this? I know you're for progressive government, but this seems like dishonest government.
No, what really peeves me is that they just sent I just got it in the mail too. They send us a letter. They're saying they didn't prepare us, like, starting April, we're going to, rate your hikes is going to be 16%, whatever the hell it was. And I was like, oh my gosh, all I kept thinking is about the clients I serve. And many of them don't even have a pot to piss in, to be quite frank with you. They don't have an extra $16. That is a difference of, I think somebody said it, maybe Dr. Loda said, a gas tank. They don't have money to get to counseling. And now they're having to pay added water bills. How are they going to even put food on the table? That's what I look at. I think about the clients we serve who, have families, who are single mothers, who are dealing with trauma and just having to put food on the table. I mean, I got a client, it's like, just to be able to get gas to get to the organization, to get some counseling is the difference of a day. And now we're asking all these citizens, many of people in our communities, to buck up an extra 16, 18%. It's just not fair. And there was no planning, and there was no preparation, and there was no just forewarning of this happening. It just, here you go, it's going to happen. So yeah, it pisses me off. For sure.
It wouldn't be so bad if they were honest about it. I mean, if you're the average person, you get an increase. And so you Google and it says that they're going to increase your water every year based on population inflation. And you say, okay, let me just Google and see what the population is in the city of Houston. It's going to say it went down. And you're going to be sitting there like, okay, so why does it? I mean, it's just it wouldn't be so bad if it were accurate and if it were honest.
I wish Bill King could put on his lawyer hat, get the person that formulated that 8.1% and the 1% population growth and get them on a witness stand and cross-examine them. What would you ask, Bill?
Look, when I saw those numbers, I just intuitively knew they were wrong because I follow all that stuff pretty closely. And so it took me several days though to sort of figure out, and Chris Brown's office was actually very helpful in they were trying to figure it out along with me. And they sent me the spreadsheet that the city used to calculate this 8.2. And this gets way off in the weeds, but they were basically using a number that was an average of the months as opposed to the year over year increase, which showed about double what it was. I'd be real curious to know how they did this in previous years to see if they used that number they used, because it sure looked like they were cherry picking any number they could find on the chart that justified the highest possible rate. But I don't know. It'd be interesting to me to see what happened if a lawsuit was brought.
That was going to be my
over
next
this.
question to you. I wonder if someone can sue, because the ordinance doesn't say they're going to use these special calculations or the metro numbers. It says they're going to use
Yeah.
city population and inflation.
Yeah,
Hey, I wanna-
unfortunately, the ordinance is very poorly written. It's really very ambiguous about what's supposed to be on there. And they're clearly just sort of making this up as they go along. And to some extent, that ambiguity helps them on that. But I don't know, man. You're talking about this rate increase is going to bring in $200 million more revenue next year. Now, just think about that for a minute. The drainage fee only brings in about $100 million a year. For all the fighting we've been doing with the drainage fee all these years, this 1 year's increase is going to jump the revenue up by $200 million. And if they were using the right number, it ought to be about 100 million. It looks like to me. I wonder if there's some plaintiff's lawyer out there that would find bringing $100 million lawsuit against the city of Houston an interesting idea.
Hey, I want to ask Charles Blaine something, because we reported those strongly worded letters from Senator Huffman and Senator Betancourt. We haven't heard from first term state rep Mano Diala and Lacey, who's in her second term. Have you heard any reaction? Huh?
I said, or Penny Shaw, who's in that she's covers too. Yeah, I have not heard anything, and I'm curious as well. And to give Diala credit, during the board meeting on Friday, they said that he helped them. I forgot. I can't remember specifically what legislation it was, but they were looking for legislators to assist them, and he was one of the ones who was trying to help them kind of figure this out when they went up to Austin. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like it's a smaller district with just a handful of legislators, and so I'm curious what they think about it as well. I have not heard anything, and so I mean, it's shocking to see how forceful the letter was written. That it was written, and the first signatory was the Republican trustee who had just been elected kind of in that wave of education reform, frustrated with masks, frustrated with what the library was in the library, CRT, all that kind of stuff. And so for her to sign on and be so vocal about her frustration with the Republican legislators over, it's really interesting. And I said this in commercial, but I'll say it now. She said that she is willing to explore every option in order to not send that money back, even if it's just not sending the money back and making the state come for it. She said something like, come and take it. So it's gonna be
They're going to come and take it and even more.
That's a good segue. Bob, you're pretty well versed with the law in terms of firearms here in the state of Texas. And my question, we talked a little about earlier, when the alleged victim in the Perry case walked onto the street with a long gun, that was his right. But does that change the fact that he's brandishing it? Does that change the way the law, or I mean, could anybody have perceived him as a threat to them if the muzzle were pointed in their direction?
Well, if you're carrying a gun, any gun, but particularly a long rifle, it's incumbent upon you to make sure you're carrying that gun in such a way that it's not perceived to be a threat to any person. And typically you'll see people at protests that are promoting Second Amendment rights and stuff, you'll see them with a rifle slung over their back or slung over their shoulder, not being carried in a tactical ready position, which is what Garrett Foster did. And so the tactical ready position means you're ready to use that weapon. And that sends body language signals to anybody looking that this person is a threat. This person is trying to intimidate me with this weapon or trying to prepare themselves to use deadly force against me. Now, in this particular case, Garrett Foster had done that many times to many cars around the area, and that evidence was not allowed to be brought into this trial. He had stood in front of cars with his rifle to block traffic and stop people from driving down the street. And it appears he made a similar type of move on Daniel Perry in this situation. The lead detective in this case, who appeared as a defense witness, showed how he was standing, and there's photographic evidence to back this up, to where the muzzle of that gun was pointed at the door of Daniel Perry with his finger in a tactical ready position. All he had to do to fire that weapon was literally move his finger and squeeze the trigger. And so, yes, you are in imminent fear of your life at that point, but that evidence wasn't allowed to be presented in such a way that it showed Garrett Foster as being the initial aggressor in that situation. Daniel Perry came to that intersection, made a right turn, I believe it was, into oncoming protesters who were occupying the streets illegally, and all of a sudden they moved towards his car. You can see it in the videos. They swarmed his car and started pounding on it and yelling at him and all of these types of things. And then when the gunfire erupted from Daniel Perry in self-defense, he backed away from that. And so back to your original question, you have to take responsibility when you're carrying a weapon, whether it's on your hip, in your hands, or on your arms, wherever it is. You have to make sure that you're not sending a message that you're threatening anybody. And that's what he was doing in this situation. And that's why Daniel Perry reacted the way he did. I mentioned one incident of juror misconduct on the show. There was actually a second incident of juror misconduct, and that involved the alternate juror. Alternate jurors are not allowed to participate in jury deliberations in any way, shape, or form. I talked to some career prosecutors about this, and they said usually they're not even allowed in the room, but if they are allowed in the room, they're told to sit there, shut up, listen, don't make any body gestures, don't get involved, look at the wall, don't, you are not a participant in this process. And they're there just to listen so that if somebody drops dead in the middle of deliberations, they can take over. In this case, this defendant was exercising influence into the jurors to the point where they knew that her intent was that there should be a conviction in this case. She was rolling their eyes anytime a self-defense claim was made. She was making harumph kind of sounds, those kind of things, using body language, getting upset, throwing her hands, all this kind of stuff to influence the jurors. And that is not allowed in the deliberative process. So now you've got two instances of jury misconduct in this case that absolutely should call for a new trial. And then on top of that, it never should have been indicted in the first place. When you have a detective filing an affidavit against the district attorney, claiming that the district attorney tampered with his evidence, ordered him to remove dozens and dozens of pages from a 300-page report, and then threatened him and took retaliatory action against him after he didn't do what the district attorney said, they put him on a Brady list. And for people that don't know what a Brady list is, that means you're not allowed to testify in court anymore because you're an uncredible witness. That's what they did to this detective, a 28-year veteran of the Austin Police Department, one of their most successful homicide detectives in the history of the city. And they put him on a Brady list, which ended his career. And fortunately, when he left there, now he works for the Texas Attorney General's office. But clearly, you have a Soros-backed rogue district attorney who went in here not to seek justice, but to further a political agenda of doing away with the right of people to defend themselves in life-threatening, endangering situations. And that's this whole fiasco is a result of that. And the victim's family, or not the decedent's family is not getting justice in this process either, because they're being given false promises, false hopes. And the fact is that this should have never been brought to trial. There should have never been an indictment. And now we've seen what a farce the trial was. And Governor Abbott is right. When you've got a rogue district attorney that is thwarting the judicial process, somebody's got to step in and stop it.
Can I just say something in the court? And I know that the criminal justice system has to play out. And, if there is a new trial, if there is a mistrial, declare a new trial. But in the court of public opinion, if Governor Abbott exonerates this defendant, this convicted killer, he is going to exonerate a guy who has documents of racist remarks on social media. He is clearly threats to kill.
That's not what he was charged with. He was charged with murder.
I just said court of a public opinion. The court of public opinion. I'm not talking about the court. I'm just talking about, is this guy a racist? Yes, he is. Why do we know
That's
that?
not a crime.
Because he shares it.
That's not a
Court of
crime. You don't
public
put people in prison for the rest of their life for being a
Court of
racist.
public opinion. You're going to exonerate a racist
But you shouldn't put,
who
if the
threatened to
law-
kill protesters.
okay,
Publicly threatened to kill protesters. And
Well,
the governor, he wasn't sitting in the trial. I understand there's issues. There's clearly issues. Bob, you've made it very clear. I'm just,
well, John, I want to ask you this, because you're trained as a journalist to find the facts, but you're also trained as a therapist to understand that two people were going into this situation looking for trouble to some degree.
with their own biases.
Talking about it in an incredibly tense, violent situation where both had the inclination for violence, and we've heard that the muzzle was pointed in an extremely tense situation. People pushing on the car. I mean, can you see how bad things can happen?
I understand and I see it, but remember, we have a jury of peers who have to make this determination. That's how the laws work. That's how the criminal justice system works. If there were flaws that Bob mentioned, because I haven't followed this case closely, then declare a mistrial, try it again. But we can't make these, these rash decisions based on, oh, this is what I saw. No, let the jury of your peers make that decision.
Well, and
Yes.
one other quick thing on this.
As
One
a
other quick
social
thing on this juror
As
misconduct.
social workers, we are trained that there is gray sometimes. That was a tense situation. There is a gun involved, right? But there is a guy, yes, there is a guy who comes in an Uber driver and he's like with a gun himself.
Can
With
I?
racist remarks, with
A revolver, not a AK-47.
I just wanted to say a couple of things.
So,
The Rittenhouse case, was dismissed or whatever.
self-defense case, yes.
That one, I look back and I say, well, the criminal justice system played out, and maybe there were things there that we didn't know, and that's justice. Sometimes it not always tips in someone's favor. But in this case, it seems the overwhelming was that when you're both going to a hostile situation, the level of threat exists automatically. Let me give you an example. If I go to HEB and a guy has an AK-47, whether it's in his back or pointed down, carrying, I consider that a threat. I'm already threatened by this posture, by having a weapon, even though he has a right to have it. But my question is, whoa, in any sudden move, he can accidentally shoot somebody. I would feel threatened. The other thing is that you shoot as a last recourse. He could have, when he went into that, knowing that there's protesters armed with weapons, common sense tells you, if I'm going in there, it's a hostile situation. I'm putting myself in harm's way. So, if he was attacked and all that, he can just back out and could have gone.
He couldn't. He was surrounded. He would have had to run over people to back out of there.
A guy break his leg than to shoot him. He has that option. It's the last line of defense. But he didn't do that. He went with intention to kill African Americans or Muslims. He had that mindset already. It was part of his paradigm, his DNA, and that was a white supremacist. When I saw Rittenhouse walking down the street with a rifle, with an AK-47, he was itching for a fight, and I knew when he was confronted with someone, he was going to shoot him, because that just provoked the other person. Cause and effect analysis here. But this just, it reminds me of the O.J. Simpson, when the chief of police from LA made racist statements, and that swayed the jurors, because that's how O.J. system was able to get, because those underlying thoughts are what provokes actions.
Why did the decedent in this case feel compelled to bring a semi-automatic long gun to a protest.
Do we not have rights in this state? Who cares why he felt
That's
that way?
Texas.
It's not
I
not
want
the
to
matter of the
walk,
fact
if
that
I
he
want to
brought
walk
it.
to Herman Park right
You
now,
Republicans voted for the right to carry arms.
if I want to walk to Herman Park right now or go to HEB or walk around my block with my gun, I should be able to. That is our right in the state of Texas. So it doesn't matter.
Okay,
But you
you
don't have
also
the
know
right to carry it in
consequences
a
for
threatening
exercising
manner.
that right.
Yeah, but I
You
would
are
not.
perceived as a threat. You are perceived as a threat, as Sergio pointed out. And
Yeah,
an extremely, and I'm surprised there wasn't the lesser included charge of criminally negligent homicide. Why wasn't that, an option?
Because
Your
this district attorney has an agenda that he's trying to play. He's not seeking justice. He's seeking to further a political agenda. And that was evident through the entire grand jury
And it is
process.
the victim's family was seeking. I would argue that the victim's family would call this seeking justice.
Yes, and the defense guys, you just
He
fire
doesn't.
them. Just fire them if they did such a shoddy job of defending.
No, they don't need to fire him. They need to put him in jail for witness tampering and retaliation against a witness.
Well,
That's
Well,
what needs to happen to him. He
I
needs
guess
to be
the thing
disbarred
that-
and prosecuted.
Look, the thing I said this earlier, based on a little bit I know about the case, look, you got to separate out how you feel about these people and whether either of them should have been there with a gun and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't think either one of these people or somebody I want to have over at my house for dinner, But I do not see how you can prove a murder charge based on these facts beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
I mean, even if the guy went there with bad intent, even if he was there with bad intent, the state still has to prove that he did not need to do this to protect himself. And how can you do that when a guy's standing there with an AK-47 at least pointed somewhere in that? I mean, how could you ever prove that beyond a reasonable doubt? So, I don't know. I don't see how you get there as a criminal conviction, but I will say this. I think it's clear it was a grossly unfair trial. But let me just tell you, unfair trials go on every single day in this state.
all the time.
And nobody's makes a big, huge deal about those that they're
They're
making over this case. And it's all because of the politics. But defendants are represented by crappy criminal, court-appointed lawyers every single day in this case and get wrongly convicted by the standard that I just described.
What if I've got one hypothetical here? If the Uber driver had picked up his gun and the guy with the AK-47 had pulled the trigger and shot him, would you have charged him with murder, or would he be defending himself?
If the Uber driver picked up his gun first and then got shot?
Or they're both pointing at each other. If the Uber driver's gun jammed and he shot him. Or
Well,
if they're both just
if he
pointing at each
lifted
other.
his gun as to shoot that guy and the guy shot back in defense to prohibit himself from getting shot.
Or if the guy with the long gun looks in and he sees the gun in the car and thinks that the Uber driver is going to use it against him and shoots it preemptively.
Well,
Is
see,
that
that's completely different. If he did not brandish or put his gun towards that other guy, that's completely different. But I think this is a good point, because we had a conversation on this show a couple of weeks ago about the 10-year mandatory minimum bill for gun crimes, and this is exactly one of the concerns, is that subjectively in the moment, you might think that something might be a threat, and objectively it's not, and then you get caught up in a 10-year mandatory minimum. And this is a perfect example of that. And I don't know if the guy brandished his gun and put his AK-47 towards the other guy or not, or what, but this is a perfect example of that.
And you'll never know in this situation. You'll never know exactly what happened in that moment. And that's why you can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
There's very little real evidence in this case, other than there is photographic evidence showing the decedent with his gun in this type of a position pointed towards the car. And the autopsy evidence proves that he was turned to the left, like he was pointing down like this, because the bullets entered through the left side of his body and went into the body chamber, as opposed to standing there. If he'd been standing there face on with the gun pointed at the ground, the bullets would have come into his chest front on, but they didn't. They came in this way, which is because he was like this in the ground, which the photographic evidence supports that. And the detective's testimony clarifies it again. It's a the whole thing has been botched from the very beginning. Daniel Perry was never arrested by the police until District Attorney Jose Garza, indicted him. The police didn't believe he committed a crime. After interviewing it, he gave a complete statement, which he never should have done, but he gave a complete statement about what happened there.
He basically called and self-reported, as I understand.
He did. He drove a few blocks away, called the police and said, "Hey, I shot a guy. I'm at this intersection. Come on over. I'll give you a statement," that kind of stuff. That's not a guy that committed murder and is trying to get away from it and thinks he did something wrong.
I mean, I don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know that exonerates him from murder. He killed some.
If I wanted to get away with
not
murder,
an
I would do
indication
that.
of murder.
The problem, Chow, you and Sergio are assuming that he's guilty. I mean, I can just tell it in your voice because you don't like the guy. That's not how the criminal justice system works. There's a presumption of innocence, and you've got to prove that the guy's guilty. And I just don't see the evidence in this case.
I understand that. I'm saying declare a mistrial, bring on a new trial, but I think that
I think that goes without
fairly tried.
Yeah, that goes without question that there needs to be
I don't know if that
a
goes
mistrial.
without question in Travis County, because you've got this judge who's already disallowed key exonerating evidence about who was the initial aggressor in this case, didn't allow any of that testimony into court. And so,
but Bob, that goes on every day. I mean,
I get it. My wife's a defense
this goes
attorney.
on every day in courts in this state, all over the place, and the governor's not running out trying to,
let me ask
pardon all
you
those people.
That's the problem. It was the governor's statement. Because if he just asked for a pardon and let it go and just let the board do what it was going to do, it'd be fine. This is the same thing when he before they even proceeded with charges on those cops that beat up the BLM protester in Austin. He said, if they are convicted, I will pardon them. That was well before anything. That was when they were just charged and nothing had even happened. So it's only in specific instances in which we think that he thinks that he should insert himself into the process. And I think that, I mean, that's what
as he has a right to do.
Well, not to demand a pardon before the Board of Pardons of Parole.
He didn't demand a pardon. He requested the board look at it and issue a recommendation.
Yeah, but Bob, come on. It was
premature to say.
It was done for politics. I mean, it was done for
he
politics.
appoints them. If he says, "Give me a pardon," I mean,
there's 100 people. There's 100 cases you go find that were just as unjust as this one was.
Absolutely.
This was done for political. This is for political reasons.
That's my issue, Bill. That's my issue, is that why this case, when there's so many other injustices, so many other cases where
this is plain.
But I think, and that's fine, Sergio. But don't undermine your argument by trying to pretend that the evidence overwhelmingly shows this guy's guilty when it clearly doesn't.
Also, there's I haven't even seen the evidence. I'm just giving my opinion here. I'm not a legal scholar. But
don't confuse me with the facts.
Is that the issue is here? Why is just like Charles? Why is the governor inserting himself in this process, this criminal justice process? Let it pan out. They haven't even sentenced him. Traditionally, folks were pardoned after they were convicted and sentenced. This is unprecedented. This is unique.
Yes.
That is what that's drawing the attention. That is my point. Yeah,
I think it's unusual. I don't think it's unprecedented.
Lawyers and the judges, it's up to them. But
let me jump in here. The governor made the statement on Sunday, appeared in Houston on Tuesday, and had an opportunity, if he wanted to be on national TV, to just walk over to the gaggle, of which I was one and was screaming questions, and make another statement about his intent or his inclination to pardon. I think he's sitting on this. He knows
the information came out.
I think he's sitting on this, and I think he's gonna and he realizes that he needs to let it play out.
Greg, to your point, he also didn't accept Tucker Carlson's invitation to come on Tucker Carlson's show and make the statement there about it either. He just said what he had to say, put it out in a written statement.
That pales in comparison to.
Well, I know. I mean, certainly he would much rather come to the greatness of Greg Groogan's press gaggle.
I know.
And I wish I'd have been there with you. I'd have helped you get him over there.
I agree with Bill. that there's clearly a political component to this. I'm not saying that the governor doesn't have the right. I think that asking the Board of Pardon Paroles to make a recommendation, I hope that they are people of integrity and are not going to get, back channel instructions of what he would like to see happen. I am incredibly concerned about the jury tampering charges and the witness tampering charges that Bob has brought up. And I agree with Chow, based upon that alone, and the fact that lives are in the balance here, maybe we need a restart on this case.
But
typically, all evidence.
typically you wouldn't have clemency being considered until after all the judicial appeals and everything had played themselves out. But listen, I wish the governor's office would take a lot more active role in reviewing cases where people are unjustly convicted. Because I'm just telling you, from being down there and trying cases for a good part of my career, it happens all the time. And people are coerced into signing plea bargains when they haven't done anything. I mean, this is not like the first time this has ever happened, that you had a DA with a political agenda that went off and did. Now, it frequently happens on the other side of the aisle, And so if you're going to do this, if you're going to go out and you're going to, be an activist, proactively seek out these kind of cases, then, sit down with, Amnesty International and some of these other groups that, do their research and collaborate with them and really find cases where people have been. Look, we've had all kinds of high profile cases, especially of African-American men being convicted of things, serving, decades in prison, then being released and suing the state. I mean, if you're going to do this, then let's do it right and be proactive about it on both sides.
Funny how we don't get tweets about those calling for pardons.
That's right.
I'm going to be an activist now for Jay and Lana and Cheryl.
Appreciate it.
Guys, go join them. Tell you, I appreciate you all very much. I love our spirited conversations, and there's no hard feelings afterward. So, live long and prosper. Okay.
Yeah.
See y'all.